Well, good morning and welcome back to AIEC Webinar Weeks. Webinar Weeks aims to address today's industry challenges and opportunities along with solutions and tips on how to overcome them. This has been, a really fun series. We're at, I think we're sitting at episode 30 now in series 2. We've really enjoyed this, and we feel like we've been able to provide some really good content. So we do plan on continuing this. We plan on starting back up on March 2nd. Today will be the last 4 in this series, and at the end, hopefully tomorrow, actually we'll be able to get a survey out to you. We do ask that you take a little bit of time, fill out that survey, send that back to us, and that will get your name in the drawing for our grand prize. We will give that away on our very first webinar, Series 3, on March 2nd, so look forward to that. Quick reminder or announcement on the CTC conference. We do plan on running that in person this year, provided everything goes smoothly and we're able to do that. That will be in Bloomington Normal on October 13th through 15th, so more to come on that. Real quick, a couple of housekeeping items. This presentation will be roughly an hour. We'll leave 45 minutes. We'll leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. We do ask that you submit those questions through the chat function in Zoom. Please make sure you select the drop-down box, click on AIEC, direct those questions to Brian and myself, and we will moderate those questions to our presenter on your behalf. As always, try and keep your microphone muted and unless otherwise asked. We'd appreciate that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, thank you, Dan. Our presenter today is Jeff Foley. As the Chief Technology Evangelist for Cybersecurity at Siemens Digital Connectivity and Power Organization, Jeff joined Siemens in 1998, specializing in industrial control system networks, bringing informational technology security and best practices into the operational technology environment for utilities, oil and gas, transportation, and rail, amongst other industrial networks. In 2015, he hosted several cybersecurity NERC-CIP roadshows in the US, helping utilities prepare for the transition from NERC-CIP version 3 to version 5. Jeff's also a contributor to the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, Nist SP 1800 7C Situational Awareness for Electric Utilities Practice Guide. So after that mouthful, I'll hand it off to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Brian and Chris, and I appreciate AIEC allowing me to present and show you what Siemens is doing in the way of cybersecurity for the critical infrastructure and bulk electric system. So what I want to talk to you about is our overall defense in depth strategy and how we look at cybersecurity from critical infrastructure, and then the overall concept, the view, and the products, the services, and the solutions. If we talk about cybersecurity, we know that cybersecurity is a program. It's a one and done. And we try and figure out, what's driving security in our environment now. For decades, the IT, the banks, the enterprise systems have been doing security, but it hasn't been until really NERC has pushed this into being mandated a number of years ago with CIP version 3, then to version 5, now 6 and 7, that we really have been mandated to do that or to embrace that. And the reason for that is we are migrating from the old traditional analog into a more digitalization world, and for connectivity and ease of operations. And as we make that transition, it helps us from an operational standpoint, as in having that remote access, but also getting information, understanding the health of those assets, and doing predictive analysis or analytics. But by doing that, getting that connectivity for ourselves, it also exposes us to the attack vectors, or opens up more attack vectors for others too, right? When we see it, we know that most of the cyber attacks happen from the inside, not necessarily nefarious or for bad reasons. Sometimes it's just by mistakes, or sometimes it's no fault of our own. But no, we have the external threats, and then we have the internal threats. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that as we have that connectivity, we're getting that infrastructure in place and that communication, that we're putting together secure environments. Because you can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the news or look at any information anymore without seeing that there is a new attack, or there's updates on existing attacks that are ongoing. This just seems to be happening more often than not in our world. So as I mentioned, cyber is not just a one and done. It's not a put a box in your network. It does start off with a program, and that program, following the NERC SIP guidelines, or really the risk management guidelines when we look at the OT networks, is to say that you can't secure your network unless you know what's on the network, right? You have to have an understanding of what's on the network before you know what type of security protocols or processes are programmed into place. But once you do that, you put together some type of program to secure that, and you implement that program. And following NERC, as you identify, a security manager, a SIP manager, you identify your assets, and then you add security constraints around those assets based upon the criticality. But once you do that, you still have to manage that network, right? It's not just, I can't put a box out there and say I'm secure, because things change. Just like our networks have changed, over time. We add more assets out there, we add more technology, we add more solutions or more subs or whatever. The networks change, so we have to make sure we do that. And then there's more information about whether there's vulnerabilities on the assets that we placed out there, or even on the tools that we're using to secure our assets. So we have to continually manage that. And then with any risk-based model, there's always the assess phase of that. And that assess phase is really to go out there and make sure that, am I doing the right thing? Am I updated in my policies or my processes or my tools or my solutions? So from just a security standpoint, we look at, it's got to be an overall program that really encompasses all of this. And it is an ongoing cyclical trend that we have to follow in order to ensure that we keep our critical infrastructure secure. That being said, for those that don't know, Siemens probably about 7-8 years ago purchased a company called Ruggedcom. And Ruggedcom is a product line or solutions within the Siemens digital connectivity organization. And within that product line, we do have hardware, software, solutions, services that help address that cyber. And if I start in the, just in the upper right-hand side of this, diagram, the Ruggedcom software can include stuff that we have, which has been built in-house, designed for critical infrastructures, for utilities, stuff like Crossbow and for secure remote access, just to address security, compliance, and NERC SIP. In addition to that, we have a partnership program going on where we partnered with some of the best in breed IT and OT cyber partners and brought them into our ecosystem, our environment, to ensure that we can look at security from just more than just from the device or the asset or the network layer, but really looking at security at the application layer and seeing what's really traversing the network. And we have a platform of these and a bunch of different ones that we'll get into a little bit later on, just to show how we can take adding additional solutions and making a more holistic offering to our customers. And then if I go around to the hardware portion, Siemens Ruggedcom platform has both layer 2 and layer 3 solutions that we do make available to add that cybersecurity. And we'll get into an upcoming slide here where we talk about doing security, looking at the OSI reference model. So we do have the ROS platform, and then we do have, which is our layer 2 platform. We do have the ROX platform, which is our layer 3 platform. And then we do have the ability to add some of those partners and software that I talked about a second ago in order to make really a holistic cyber offering. And then the last portion I want to talk about, or we'll get into, is our customized solutions and offering being done by both our field application consultants from a pre-sales opportunity, and then our professional services organization from a sales and post-sales. And that goes into supporting, do you want to do proof of concepts, pilots, or from a network design implementation, and then services, from vulnerability assessments and all that afterwards. So we'll go into all these different areas as we continue through this presentation. As I mentioned, we look at cybersecurity from the OSI reference model, and that's just the communication stack as we look at, how does that packet flow across the network? Normally when we do security is we want to make sure that we're securing the data or the application that traverses the network, right? That's why we have these communications and the networks in place. We're plugging in devices from point A to point B between substations or between the substation and the control center in order to have some type of communication. So we want to look at, how do we secure the network, but also how do we secure the data that goes across that network? Because that's the application layer. So that's really, if we can secure the application layer, if we can go up that OSI reference model and start at the data link, go up the network transport session presentation up to the application layer, we're going to secure things along the way, right? And there's things that we can do at each one of those layers to add that security or follow that defense in depth approach to make sure that we are securing our data and our infrastructure. So if I start at that bottom layer and I looked at the layer 2, that is our switching layer. That's the communication, just the regular connectivity. So if I put in, and this is any layer 2 switch or connectivity, if I put in a switch and I say I want to connect two devices together or have that communication, I'm going to just do a broadcast, right? It's just anything plugged in on that same IP subnet, I'll have some type of communication. But that communication is a broadcast and it's just accessible to anything out there, right? So if I put in a laptop or I do something else that may be compromised, I'll know about the other stuff on the network. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, I can start adding security controls at that layer 2. So without having to go in and start adding investing a lot of stuff at once, I can say, what is the low-hanging fruit? What is the stuff I can do today? The analogy I normally use is like, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. You need to start off somewhere, right? So if I start off at my existing communication layer, my layer 2, I can start adding cybersecurity controls or constraints around that. Simple things like, following best practices of disabling ports, blocking ports, using MACsec, or using communication, to MACsec filtering or stuff like that. There's stuff that we can do today, without adding anything or changing anything to start adding security to that communication layer. If I go up that communication stack and I go from layer 2 to layer 3, this is where we start doing a lot more of that security. Now, some people don't want to do layer 3. They know it's easier to do layer 2 just from an operational standpoint or communication standpoint. And there is some involvement to go from layer 2 to layer 3. But there's some also value added that I can do at layer 3 too, right? So instead of just having one broadcast domain, I can start segmenting my network. I can start putting the SCADA network on one part or the admin network on the other. So I can make sure that the controls aren't compromised if I put in a laptop that starts doing stuff. Or some of the stuff when I start doing the network segmentation starts blocking or hiding or masking other IP address subnets or communication devices out there that you would not know if I'm starting to do a scan or do a ransomware or something on the network, because it's on a different network, right? So it won't know that. And by adding layer 3 functionality, to an existing network, I can start doing stuff that just takes that security to that next level. And our ROCs platform, it starts building that, because we can do layer 2 switching, we can do layer 3 routing on that. But the one important thing with this is this is a modular platform. And its modular platform says all the line modules that I have in any one of these form factors, I can put into another one. And I can do hot swapping, and I can swap things out. So even if they're designed for 61850-3 harsh environments, but it also allows me to do hot swapping in the field and to upgrade or modify or future-proof depending upon if my infrastructure changes or if I want to add new functionality to my network. I don't have to swap out the power supply or the chassis. I can just add new line modules. One of those line modules that starts building on that defense in depth cyber story is the application processing engine 1808. That's we liken it to like it's a PC on a blade. It does by default come with a couple of different operating systems. You know, if you just want to have that edge processing out there and you want to say, I want to put either a homegrown application or do something out there, it does come in a Linux variant and a, depending upon your environment, there is a Windows environment that you can put out there, put an HMI on, but it does allow you to start extending that processing or that capability of doing cyber out to the edge instead of just having that centralized function. Because it is going into our layer 3 platform, and our layer 3 platform is a fanless 61850-3 environment, that 8 card is also fanless and rated for harsh environments too. So these are some of the specs that are on this. As I mentioned, you know, it is a PC on a blade. There was a predecessor to this that some of you might have known about, which was a single core processor, which didn't allow us really to do some of this next generation functionality. So we came out about 15 months ago with this new line module, or the 1808, which allows us to do this distributed processing or doing some of this next generation stuff out on the edge. So if you already have an existing 1500 in your network, you can add this line module and then expand the capability or expand the cyber functionality out onto the edge. So if I do that, you know, I was looking at layers 2 and layers 3 on that OSI reference model. How do I get to that layers 4 and layers 7 of securing the data? You know, looking at the application and securing that data. Well, we have a couple of solutions that help us do that. If I start on the left-hand side here, we have something, you know, for IDS, or Intrusion Detection System. There are a couple of different variants of IDS systems out there. One variant can be a signature-based IDS system, which requires updates and no updated signature files. Normally, this is done like your antivirus is done on a monthly basis, and this just updates signature files out onto the edge for what is known. So if I know this either pattern or this protocol or something's happened out there, this signature file, if I know something's happened out there, I can identify it, and then I can flag it or I can notify you northbound. So intrusion detection is just going to notify you northbound. Now, if I looking in my OT network, maybe I just need to be notified of it and I don't want to shut it down yet. An alternative to the signature file variant of this is called Anomaly Based. An Anomaly Based will just look at anomalies. So from an OT perspective, if I have assets that are just supposed to communicate in a certain pattern or certain protocols, if they start looking for scanning the rest of the network, or maybe they start, there's all of a sudden traffic is starting to look outside of my network or is trying to reach the internet or quote phone home, then maybe that's an anomaly. And if that's an anomaly on my network today, then that'll be an anomaly tomorrow, and that'll be an anomaly 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So from a OT perspective, anomaly-based IDS systems are more friendly, are more congruent for customers that don't want to have that the OpEx of having to download signature files all the time. But maybe you want a combination, so that is available. An alternative solution could be deep packet inspection. Deep packet inspection, and again, what do you want to do on the network, and what do you want to know? Maybe I want to have an understanding of, is the DMP3 really DMP3, or is it, somebody snooping my traffic and masking themselves as SCADA protocols that really are not SCADA protocols and it's malware. So having the ability to see the traffic, and it could be either in real time or it could be inline to say, I want to see it and then I want to look at it and pass it on. Or maybe I want to take that traffic and port mirror that traffic offline and just look at that and alert you northbound. So you can still have the deterministic networking needed for OT networks, but you can still do the DPI offline and then notify northbound. So that's a possibility. Third, if we look at intrusion prevention, that's blocking that traffic. And that's not necessarily something that you're going to want to do, at that lower levels of the network. I don't want to do that on my east-west traffic inside of my substation, but maybe I want to do that intrusion prevention between substations or between my substation and my control center. It's possible that you want to block any traffic coming out of your control center that's going out to a place that you haven't identified, or it's not the IP address and ports that's been identified for your control center. So having an intrusion prevention system, it may or may not be something that is viable for your organization, but there is a capability there, IPS system notifying for the OT environment. And then last is a next generation firewall. So we talked previously at that layer 3 network. If I have a layer 3 device, I can start doing firewalling and looking at my network traffic. But what happens if I want to start looking at the application layers 4 through 7? I can still look at that application layer either by port mirroring the traffic onto a device, onto the APE 1808, and doing that information there, or I can do that communication between the control center and substation. I can do next generation firewall and prevent any traffic going northbound or southbound. So next generation firewall generally will consist of a couple of the previous things that we talked about here, or it can compromise or be encompassing of all of those. So these are just some of the solutions that we'd want to look at when we look at a defense in depth or a holistic cyber offering. So if I have these solutions, which one do I want to have, or which one would be best for me, or where do I want to put this on the network? Or if I just get a next generation firewall, will that solve all my problems? Or if I do, just IDS? Not necessarily. So we look at this, the defense in depth approach is, says, if I build a castle and I put a wall around that, that'll stop some people. But if I put a moat, then that'll stop more people. And if I shoot bows and arrows and throw hot oil over the side, these are all things that, you put together to reduce the attack surface and to mitigate any vulnerabilities, right? And we do that for our house by, adding locks on the doors and alarm systems. And we do turn off or have outside lights on at night. These are all things that we do as a collective to secure our house. And these are things that we can do as a collective to secure our network too, right? So we want to put the right solution in the right place to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, but it's also not impeding on the operationalization of our OT network. So maybe if I want an anomaly based or a signature based IDS system, I can put that in the substation and it'll look at that east-west traffic down in the substation. It will see the information that's going across that, which normal visibility on a firewall doesn't give you. Normal firewalls just give you visibility on layer 3 or higher in that north-south traffic. But if I do that in anomaly-based or signature-based IDS system, I can port mirror that traffic off of that layer 2 and showing you what's going on in that east-west traffic. I can also do the same for deep packet inspection. I can look at all that traffic, I can port mirror it off and say, hey, here's what's going on. And I can notify you of that information. Now, I can either use that deep packet inspection just for a notification, or I can take that information and then work with another system that may do intrusion prevention. And if I understand that, that the protocols or the ports or the information in that traffic is not what I want it to be, I can start blocking that with an IPS system. And you can see in the IPS system, we normally probably don't want to do that downstream on the network, for that east-west traffic. but maybe we just want to do the IPS between locations, between control center, or between control center and substation, or between different substations. So it's where do I want this communication, or where do I want to put my solution to have the best impact for that defense in depth strategy. And then, as I mentioned, the next generation firewall, it can encompass some or all of those, or it can work with other solutions for a integrated, holistic approach for that. So the next generation firewall, I put in my substation, entry point into the substation, which most locations already have some type of firewall. So this can either be put, either south of that or next to it, or if you have some type of gateway in there, this can be added to that, and just look at that traffic and port mirror it off. And then the last thing here is even though I have these tools in place, maybe I also want to do something about connectivity or access to these devices. Now, if I look at my SIP standard, SIP 5-5 requirement 2 says I need to have some type of intermediate remote access for my medium impact with external routable connectivity, or my high impact subs. So it's saying that, I want to make sure that who is supposed to have access to those devices has access to those devices, and they are who they say they are, and that we're able to verify that. So there's a product called Crossbow, which was designed or developed by Bow Networks, and then Ruggedcom purchased Bow Networks, and then Siemens purchased Ruggedcom. So it is designed in-house as a secure remote access tool and solution. It is a multi-vendor solution, so it does have the capability of providing that secure remote access and two-factor authentication to most of the popular devices that are out in substations. Again, if there are any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, we can take them at the end. So for all those solutions that we were talking about, if I look at some of the partners that Siemens has partnered with to provide the holistic defense in depth, from an IDS DPI perspective, one of the partners that we have is a company called SecureNOC, and the SecureNOC agent can be installed on the 1808, the APE 1808, or even the predecessor of the 1404. The low profile agent that gets installed on there. And there's also agents that can be installed if you have an HMI in your sub or something like that. It can be a host-based IDS system. So we can start looking at anomalies on the network and do the port mirroring of the traffic to the 1808, and do that anomaly detection. And that will allow you, and there are rules that you can define, and you can either tighten the constraint or open up the constraint to get less notification. But from an IDS perspective, it is built from the ground up for OT environments, and it does that detection and notification of any traffic that may, or information that may be out on the network. Another partner is called Nozomi. Nozomi is a partner of Siemens, and we put them, we have a partnership to put them on the APE card also. And this allows us to do that distributed intrusion detection along with SecureNOC out onto the edge and look at that east-west traffic in the control center or in the substation. And they do both anomaly based, and they also support signature files too. So some people want to rely upon getting updated signature files, and it has that capability of doing that. It also has the capability of doing anomaly based, so you can do one or both. Depending upon what your preferences is from an organization. And they have a good understanding of OT protocols. But along with doing intrusion detection, Nozomi has the capability of doing deep packet inspection. And by doing that, they're able to look at the traffic and then alert on what it is and say, look, not only am I doing anomaly based or whatever, I can open up the packet and say, hey, I know this isn't what it's supposed to be, and send that northbound notification. Clarity is another solution that we've actually been a different organization within Siemens has been a partner of Clarity for a number of years. And then our organization just recently signed a partnership with Clarity. So we're able to do an IDS and DPI with Clarity on the application processing engine 1808 that's out into the substation. And Clarity has a good visibility and understanding of OT protocols also. The last one we have here, it's not really necessarily available to the US because based upon our government constraints, we're not allowed to offer or sell this in the US. But this is offerings, I left this in here to show you that there is capability that if you do have your own system or your own homegrown tool that may not be offered by Siemens, you're able to add that onto the APE card and put that out onto the edge to provide that distributed processing to have that capability out there. So in that Kaspersky solution, while you cannot get that from Siemens, you can get the APE card and put your own solution on it and either be the integrator or have an integrator install it on the APE card for you and then deploy it out there. Kaspersky is just one that we have tested on the APE card and we use in other regions throughout the world that are allowed to or do use Kaspersky. So that's just an offering. The first three solutions that I mentioned are solutions that you can get with the regional sales manager. And you can say, I want to try this out, or I want to do a proof of concept, or this is what I want to do, or maybe I'm currently using one of those in my enterprise side, and we want to extend that out to my OT side. So we want to do that. So that's an offering that the RSM will be able to provide you a turnkey solution to say, here's a quote for the APE card with the software, with the license, and the support for the installation configuration of that in your network. If I go on to the other solutions about the next generation firewalls and intrusion preventions, some of the partners that we have, starting off with Fortinet. Fortinet is our next generation, one of our next generation firewall vendors that we put out onto the edge. We have the Forti gate software that goes onto the APE card, goes out onto the edge, and they're able to do just next generation firewall capability. But the interesting thing about the Fortinet is that they have a partnership with Nozomi. So they can do, Nozomi does intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and then they share that with Fortinet, and then they can do the prevention. So there's a relationship between Nozomi and Fortinet outside of Siemens, but then we can also put them both on the solution in the APE card. So I can have one APE card that may have Nozomi that does the intrusion detection and deep packet inspection, and then I have another APE card that could have Fortinet on there, and that can do the intrusion or do the next generation firewall. And then the last solution we have here is called Checkpoint. And Checkpoint is just another next generation firewall that we have tested on the APE card. It does signature-based IDS, and they can also do a lot of the next generation features and firewalls from that layers 4 through 7. So these are just two of the next generation firewall solutions that we have that can work in this in our environment on the 1808 cards that reside on the RX 1500s that help do that end-to-end defense in depth. Any questions?
No questions at this time, Jeff.
Thanks. So if I go further in that, I said some of the Siemens software stuff, we have a product called Crossbow. Crossbow does secure remote access. And as I mentioned, it does help satisfy the SIP 5-5 R2 requirement. It is a centralized solution by default. So if I look at the diagram on the right-hand side here, I see that the Ruggedcom Crossbow Secure Access Manager is a simplex solution. It can be just one server, depending upon the size of the network. I can have one server, or if my practices or my requirements require, I can have a redundancy. So I can have high availability. So I can do active or active standby. We also do two-factor authentication. So we can make sure who's supposed to be on the network is on the network. So we can use RSA, Active Directory, Radius authentication server. So we can have those profiles. Once I do that, I can have a profile, I'll log in, and that profile will tell me whether I'm allowed to have access to certain substations or to certain assets on the substations, whether I'm allowed to log in at layer 1 or I can log in at layer 2. It just does that role-based access. And because Crossbow is a multi-vendor tool, we are able to access those devices. So if you have some different manufacturers, relays, or stuff out in the field, we can actually access those devices, and upon connection to those devices, we can launch that third-party support application that does the communication to them, and to the end user, it will look like that application is launched and connected directly to the asset. To the communication will start from the Crossbow client. They will connect to the Crossbow server. The connection will terminate. They'll do the two-factor authentication, and then they will say, oh, I have access to a device downstream. Let me right mouse click on that and hit connect. And once it hits connects, the Crossbow server will go out and make the connection to the downstream device. And then it will bring the connection back to the Crossbow server. Then the Crossbow server will present that through the Crossbow client. So there is a true intermediate protocol break between the end user and the downstream device. So it's not like a basic Windows terminal session where if I connect to a terminal server and then I connect to a downstream device, that connection is just a bypass for the terminal server. Here with Crossbow, that is a protocol break. So and we do a secure TLS connection between the client and server, which prevents any man-in-the-middle attack or any visibility from the outside to see what you're doing or what communication or devices you're connecting to. So by default, Crossbow, just what you need or get can be a single server, or it can be a redundant system that has a communication path between the two, and then the client will connect to that using the role-based access to do that. And that's the basis from a role-based access secure remote location. Some of the additional features or functionalities within Crossbow are what we call the Crossbow application modules, or CAMs. These are in addition to what we just that basis secure access. And by the way, just beyond just that secure connectivity, the other basis from what Crossbow does is something called password management. So I can have Crossbow manage my password. I can schedule password changes, every 60, 90 days. And it can go out there and either schedule a substation, or I can schedule a single asset, or I can schedule a family of assets or whatever. So I can go out there and do that task of scheduling password changes out onto the far end. Using the application modules or the CAMs, Crossbow allows you to do a little bit more than just secure access and password management. One of the things it allows you to do is configuration management. And that configuration management is not pushing configuration out to the edge, but it is allowing you to do configuration management from tracking it. So if I go out to the edge and I say, what are my assets out on the edge? I can log into those devices, retrieve that configuration settings, put that into a file that's associated with that asset, and use that as my baseline configuration. And then if I go out there again and do that configuration management, it will go out there and retrieve, if anything has changed, it will retrieve all the settings, not just what's changed, but all the settings on that device, and store that into a second file. And then using the tools within the Crossbow, I can do a comparison between the first file and the second file, and then I can alert you to say, hey, here's what the value was yesterday, and here's what the value is today. Do you want that? And if you do want that, I can baseline, or I can right mouse click on that new configuration setting, and I can say, here's your new baseline. So every subsequent time I run that, it will alert or be based upon that new version. Or if I don't want it, then I can look at my old version and I can say, hey, let me go out and update or change back it to what it was or what my standard was identified as either 6 months ago or last week or whatever. So it does allow you to have a baseline and then run configuration request against that baseline, and then set some type of notification if and when it changes. The firmware cam does something very similar to that. For those that are proficient in routers, it does just as a show ver, lets you know what version of firmware that you're running on that device, and then you can set that as your baseline. And any subsequent time that I run that firmware cam, if it's different from that baseline, then I'll alert on it. And that's good to know that if in the days of the vulnerabilities and the notifications and the product certs and all that, if there is a notification of that I've got a version of firmware that's either been identified as being security vulnerability, I can run that firmware cam and go out there and say what devices on my network are running that version of firmware, and then I can identify and know which ones I have to modify or upgrade. The data retrieval cam is used to go out there and retrieve fault files, event files, and SOE files from pretty much SEL devices and retrieve those from those devices and putting them back into Crossbow. And then if there is a new fault or event, it'll provide a notification in Crossbow. And then if you want, you can actually just, instead of logging into the device, you just log into Crossbow and then you can see that fault or event. Or if you want to share that with somebody else, it's in Crossbow and then you can share it from within Crossbow. And then any subsequent time that the data cam is run, if anything has changed or if there's any new faults or events, it will go out there and retrieve those faults and events. And then the last cam we have here is called the connectivity cam. And that's just used to go out there and verify that you have connectivity to devices. So an example of this is if I have a device out there that talks SSH, maybe I'll go out there and I'll try an SSH session to that. And if it doesn't respond, I'll generate an alert. And if it does respond, I'll actually notify of that and then I'll move on. So it also does letting you know if it does communicate on the admin port of that device. The good thing about this is it lets you know that you have connectivity, but it's not doing intrusive scanning. It's not doing ICMP scans. It's not doing pinging. It's not doing any of that. It's just trying to verify you have connectivity to devices that you said that you have on your network, and here's how you connect to it. And I can run any of these cams either now, or I can schedule them tonight, or I can run them against a single device, or I can run it against a family of devices, or my entire network, or just a substation. I can just schedule this to be run. So these are just ways of getting more information from an automated standpoint out on from the assets out on the network. And I always say is why is Facebook and Google so successful is because they have the information. And the information is only as good as the fact of getting it into the people's hands that need it. So if I have all this information of all these assets on my network, then it's no good if people don't know about it, right? So Crossbow has a northbound interface called the Event Log Distribution Service that does provide the ability to either connect to a enterprise syslog server or to a centralized syslog server or event server, or send an email notification. An example of that could be that if I ran that firmware cam and I notice that I have a different version of firmware, then maybe I want to notify the manager in the morning that these are the assets that have been identified. Or if I run a password report, say, when's the last time the passwords have been changed on my assets in the network? It's been 220 days, then maybe I need to know about that. And I'm not following my password policies. So this is just a way of getting that information out of the system northbound to people that may need it without having to log into Crossbow. So all the stuff we talked about was what I called centralized access or secure remote access, but there's also local access too. Is what happens if the WAN interface or that communication between the control center and the substation goes down. Well, one option is what we call the station access controller, which is a module that would get installed on the mid plane of the RX 1500. So in the typical scenario is if I have a client that connects to the server and I go out and I make a change or some identification down to the downstream device, it's going to update the server. But if I have a station access controller, it will provide a secure connection back to the station access controller and says, hey, you have these assets in that substation. Here's the updated information for those assets, so you're up to date. And then if the WAN interface goes down, I can either take a local engineering laptop or my engineer's laptop that has authorization or approval. I can connect to the local interface inside of my substation, and then I can take my Crossbow client and I can connect to the local interface here, and I will have the same role-based access that I had for my centralized server as I have for my remote location. Obviously, if the WAN interface is down, I don't have two-factor authentication. But if the WAN interface is up, I can actually connect here and it will, by default, go back up and try and do that two-factor authentication. If that WAN interface is down, then I have what we call a fallback password for local authentication onto there. And then if I had level 1 access to the device on the right here from my centralized location, I would have level 1 access to that device for my secure local access. And because I have this, I don't need to know the passwords of these devices downstream because Crossbow is managing it. So I'll have the same look and user interface that I had up there. So I can log in. I can say, here's the access I have to these devices. I can right mouse click and say connect. Crossbow will go out and build the connection and then push it back to here. And because I have this in my substation and my connection to these devices are going through Crossbow, it's still doing the same keystroke logging and event or activity logging that it would do for my centralized server. It's doing it locally here. So when the WAN interface is reestablished, I can say, oh, Jeff logged on to the local access, and here's what he did to these devices downstream. And then it's all centrally consolidated here for either triaging or event calls or root analysis at a later time. Another option could be what we call the Secure Access Manager Local. So the Secure Access Manager Local would do everything that the Station Access Controller did, as in the local access, the role-based access, and then the keystroke logging and identifying what's happening. It does all that over here, but it also does all that advanced automation that I talked about earlier. So an example of that is like the password changes. If as a admin, I say, I want you to go out and change the password, I would send a request to the Crossbow server. And then typically the Crossbow server will go out and change the passwords and then update its local database. But if I have the Secure Access Manager Local, I'm going to take that request from the admin to say, go change the passwords. And I'm going to push that request down to my SAML or my Secure Access Manager Local and say, queue up changing the passwords inside of the substation at midnight tonight. And then that activity would happen locally, and then it would update the Crossbow server through a secure TLS connection between here and here. So this allows me to distribute that processing. Instead of having it locally done, I can distribute it out into the substation. And also with all the cams that I talked about, the data cam, the firmware cam, and all that, I can say run the cams instead of running it centrally, send that request out to the SAML and run those cams locally, and then send the information northbound, any updates or changes northbound through that secure communication. So if I take a step back and look at that, this allows me to take that whole defense in depth strategy of looking at that communication on layers 2, layers 3, then layers 4 through 7 with those partner solutions that we have residing on the APE 1808, and then using our Crossbow server for secure access between the control center or the designated location out to that far end device. And it allows me to start looking at intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, deep packet inspection, next generation firewall, secure remote access, password management. These are all the things that I can use to start building up on my defense in depth strategy. And I can start using that analogy of, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? I can start looking at just adding a next generation firewall or an IDS system or a secure remote access, and then I can build upon that as time goes on, or as my funding or resources or my cyber program gets built out. In addition to that is the Siemens Cynic network management system. So some of you may know that Ruggedcom had a network management system that was designed for network management of primarily Ruggedcom devices, but was able to receive faults and events from pretty much third-party devices that supported northbound SNMP communication. Well, that rugged NMS system, I liken more to like an element manager instead of a network management system. It was more of an element management system just for Ruggedcom devices, and not much of a holistic network management system that most network management systems should be. Probably about 3-4 years ago, Siemens started developing from the ground up a true multi-vendor network management system that was capable of doing that network management to multi-vendor solutions and products out there. Obviously, because of the fact of we understand our devices better and more than probably some of the others, we'll have a little bit more functionality of doing that network management, performance management, and configuration management to our assets. But because it was designed from the ground up and not something like the rugged NMS, it does provide a more holistic network management system for your network, and allows you to just have a true view of that. So that's something that is, like I said, it was developed about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's just became recently available or gone into GA or production last year. And then we did talk a little bit about our professional services, and I just want to reiterate the fact of, we do have field application consultants that do help from a pre-sales opportunity to do setup configuration and of our products and services. But we do have a professional services organization with resources in both Canada and in the US, which does provide the ability to do network design, network assessments, vulnerability assessments, and then deploying, configuring, and providing turnkey solutions to help you in the implementation of the solutions in your network and the cyber program. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that and the capability of using these resources that may help you maybe either augment some of your existing resources or just as a means and ways of adding additional services too. And then the last thing I want to talk about is supply chain management. Normally when we talk about networks, it's getting the connectivity up front, getting the communication up front, and then we add security. Then once we add security, then the last thing we talk about is, well, how do we ensure that we're secure? Well, there's a couple of things going on. Obviously with the CIP 13, which is subject to enforcement for those that fall under that constraint. That requirement is necessary now. But you want to make sure that when you design a network and you have something out there, that you're not compromising that network either by adding devices or firmware or solutions that are going to compromise your already secure network. But they're designed and they're done and provided in a secure manner. So CIP 13 provides the standards and requirements in order to help you work with or identify what you need to do for your partners and vendors and your manufacturers. And then the IEC 62443-4-1 is a standard that can help you implement that. And then there's also the Nist Framework version 1.1. I think it was updated January, February of either last year or the year before, that added supply chain management. So how you can make sure that you're working in identifying that. And then there's also the special publication 800-163 that can help you do that too. So these are just things that, if you're not considering, you want to make sure that you are considering, because if you're worried about making sure that your network is secure, you want to make sure that you're not adding any vulnerabilities to that. And then Siemens does provide, and I provided a link on this page here of just a document of what we do from a design by security by design, from an organization, from a development, from manufacturing, to our testing and our deployments and the standards that we follow to make that available, so you guys are aware of that, and you can use that as part of your documentation and evidence to your auditor. And with that, that will end my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Thanks, Jeff. We have had a few questions come in, so I'll give you a couple of those. Just generically, why do you need an OT security program?
OT networks are some of these networks that are becoming more visibility. There's a lot of things that are you'll see in the news right now between ransomware and stuff like that. And the ransomware generally follows an IT environment or an IT network. But the OT network is really where your manufacturing and your critical infrastructures are. And that's where the big bang for the bucks are. And that's where the most visibility in these hackers are coming. So, some of the stuff like the New England area went down a couple years ago. It can cause blackouts. It can cause a lot of stuff. I think a study was done 3 or 4 years ago that says if our critical infrastructure, or if our grid was hacked, we would become a third world country in, I think, like 6 days if we couldn't get our grid back up. So it's very important that we are securing our critical infrastructure and our OT network, just to ensure that we're able to keep the lights on and keep our infrastructure in place and available to our customers.
Thanks, Jeff. Another question for you. Is my business protected from emerging threats?
I think, no, it's one of those things where we keep on evolving our security, and as we evolve our security, we're finding out more and more vulnerabilities. So to see if you're protected from emerging threats, unless you have a good cyber program in place, unless you have good solutions and policies and procedures in place, you would not be protected. I do know that, if you look at a lot of stuff that's happened, some of the international stuff that's happened overseas and in the Middle East, in some of the Soviet blocs and all this, and even some of the stuff that's happened in the US, if you look at the root cause analysis and you look at that, having a good defense in depth strategy may not have prevented it, and it may not have stopped it from happening, but it definitely would have identified it or mitigated it or narrowed down the impact that it would have had. So a lot of this, when we talk about ransomware and we talk about vulnerabilities and attacks on the network, having a defense in depth strategy will narrow down the attack vectors or eliminate some of those. And then, having something like an IDS, IPS, next generation firewall will help identify that. And once you can identify it and you're aware of that, then you can take action on it instead of having that vulnerability exploit itself throughout the network.
Hey, Jeff, I got one question for you, Jeff. What might you say to those organizations that maybe find a false sense of security in, maybe assuming that their OT networks are 100% air gapped or not connected to the network?
I wish them luck. There's no such thing as 100% air gap. And so there's things where you can sit there and say, well, I've disconnected my substation. I have no connectivity to the far end. And then that may be true. But I'll tell you that a lot of the times when people tell me that they're air gapped, they have no connectivity, there is something out there. There's something, whether, some type of firewall that's preventing it, and they say it's limited connectivity, but there's always some connectivity. there's generally always something. And if it is everything standalone and air gapped and you have all that, that's fine. But people say, well, I can't hack serial. Well, that's not true. There's documented cases of serial protocols being hacked where you can get there. Some people say, well, I have fiber and I can't just do that. Well, I can bend a fiber band and I can capture some of the information that comes off of there. There's no really true. I mean, one of the interesting things about this cyber thing is you can just Google cyber attack air gap, and you'll find enough links and stuff that's happened to do that. The only real defense, and I think and it's funny thing is Edward Snowden, most of us remember is just describing what's out there and the vulnerabilities, and there's good and bad with that, right? He showed what the vulnerabilities were, which is good, so we're aware of it, but he also showed it's bad because the other people are aware of it too. So unless you really are disconnecting things, unplugging things, unpowering things, and doing all that, there's going to be some exposure to cyber.
I think a lot of that comes back to what you would mention, right off the bat is, just understanding your network, understanding what you've got and what's connected where.
I would agree.
So
know what's on your network, and then add some level of security around that. There's a difference also between compliance and security. Don't be complicit with just being compliant. Compliance just says, as I've done a check mark at a point in time in the world, in life, where it says I've done everything that's been asked of me or for this to do that. But as we're seeing, as we know, there's more and more ways of getting around that. People are getting more creative, and there's more tools becoming available to do that. If you embrace security as a concept, then if you are secure, the odds of you being compliant are pretty high. Just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure.
That's right. I agree. Well, Jeff, we appreciate your presentation today. It's very informative. Thank you for putting your contact information up there. Please, if you have any questions for Jeff, feel free to reach out to him, or you can reach out to myself, Brian, or Ashley, and we can get you in contact with Jeff. Jeff, I hope that maybe we can see you at our 2021 fall Cooperative Technology Conference. If that's something that you guys might be interested in, reach out to Ashley.
I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, we'd love to continue conversations with Siemens on securing OT networks. I know a lot of our members are really looking at SCADA and what they can do with the automation side of it, and not just the monitoring side. So definitely something that we want to pay close attention to. With that, up next, we have, what do we have up next, Brian?
UUS.
UUS, Utility Products Update. So look forward to that. If you haven't registered for that, please feel free to go out to aiec.coop/webinar weeks and register. If registration is currently closed, you can always reach out to Ashley. She'll make sure she gets you taken care of and get you registered for that. And with that, that concludes episode 30 of our AIEC webinar weeks. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you back after lunch.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.